We're going to talk now about what are the real facts on the ground. When it comes to teaching the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, the 7 laws that apply to all mankind, is there really a possibility? And how do we actualize that possibility of transforming all of mankind to observe the 7 laws of Noach, the 7 commandments and all the portions of the Torah that apply to the non-Jews and all the branches and subcomponents of the 7 laws of Noach? And the answer is a resounding yes. This is absolutely Hashem's purpose in creating all of mankind. And tonight we're going to explore the special opportunity that we have as the Jewish people to teach the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach to the Muslims and to the Arab people. And we can see that whenever we approach the question of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach and the obligation that the Jewish people have to bring the knowledge of Hashem, the oneness of God, to the entire world, there's 2 pieces of misinformation, 2 pieces of disinformation that can tend to be heard and said that can dissuade a Jewish person from actually teaching the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. One of them is to say that the people that are the potential students don't really need it. And that's based on a mistaken idea that somehow the spiritual underpinnings spiritual underpinnings and spiritual compass for the entire world is sound. And we can see that's not the case. And in fact, all the different nations of the world are meant to come and understand and the one God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as it's brought down in the Torah, and the 7 laws of Noach are commanded to the Jewish people to teach the entire world through Moses on Mount Sinai. And those that observe the 7 laws of Noach are then able, if they accept them because they were taught by Moses on Mount Sinai, then they become Chasidei Umas Ha'olam, the righteous and the Chasidim of the nations of the world. So what then is the real facts on the ground? There's one is a disinformation piece that says that they don't need it. Well, they do need it. That's our job, is to teach them the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And the fact is that there is a whole 8 billion people waiting to learn the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And they need to receive it through Moses and his descendants in order for them to reach the category of Chasidei Umas Ha'olam. So there's no question that it's misinformation and disinformation to think that somehow it's okay to leave the world untouched by the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, or even any portion of the world. In addition, there's a piece of disinformation that somehow many people in the world don't want the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. There's disinformation to say somehow some nations maybe don't want to learn from a Jewish person. And when we see this combination of disinformation come together, we see it primarily or actually exacerbated in the context of teaching Sheva Mitzvos to Arabs. And the reason being because people get confused and think, well, since they're Muslims, maybe they don't really need to hear it. And they get confused and think, well, since there are Arabs that participate in terrorist organizations and make campaigns against the Jewish people, that somehow the Arabs don't want to hear the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And this is something that's completely false. And our intention tonight is to dispel that and to help everyone realize that the point of the inspiring stories that we're going to share tonight are not merely to inspire you and to give you the opportunity to hear inspiring stories, but to see the world through a new lens, through a new set of glasses, to see them like the Torah, see the world like the Torah sees the world, and to see the non-Jewish people in the world like the Torah sees the world. And one of the 2 of the stories we're going to bring actually are from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, because the Lubavitcher Rebbe shows us a wonderful example of how we're meant to look at the world and how we're meant to see the nations of the world. So one of the ways that this is the disinformation is spread, that the Arabs don't want to be taught the Sheva Mitzvos, or somehow they're beyond redemption and beyond being taught the Sheva Mitzvos, is through the tool of terrorism. And terrorism is something that has a twofold purpose. One is it creates a political result, because in the face of terrorism, it could be used to weaken the resolve of a nation. And also, violence and terrorism is used to create division and create the idea and fear that the people that are associated with the acts of terrorism are beyond any sort of communication. And this is something that works very effectively in Israel in the land of Israel, because what happens, unfortunately, after acts of terrorism, it is used to foster a misinformation and disinformation that and a fear that perhaps every Arab is walking around with a knife in his back pocket ready to stab a Jew. And as we're going to see from the following stories, that this is actually not the case. And as a matter of fact, we're going to see how intimately connected teaching Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach is to the whole concept of the completion and the integrity of the land of Israel. Because the land of Israel, which God gave to the Jewish people and is clearly recorded in the book of Genesis, was something that all the nations know, and there is an obligation of the Jewish people to speak up and say that clearly. However, unfortunately and tragically, due to misinformation and disinformation, there's pressure from different directions for the Jewish people to surrender portions of the land of Israel. And that pressure to surrender portions of the land of Israel is based on a fundamental lie. And that fundamental lie is that there's 800 million Arabs all waiting eagerly to kill Jewish people, God forbid. And this is part of the disinformation that's made to make an enemy seem to be much, much more fearsome and stronger than it really is. Because the reality is, as we'll see from the stories that we're going to share, the number of people that actually subscribe to the terrorist methods and to the terrorist ideology is actually very, very few. And those that are left and abandoned to live under places under the rulership of the terrorists, which are places and locales that are devoid of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, that are under the rulership of atheist and murderous regimes and terrorists, those people are terrorized on a regular basis and have no choice in many cases other than to participate or mouth support for the terrorists. Plus the education systems, which we're going to address the education systems in a beautiful story in a moment, are abandoned to the teaching of concepts that are pro-murder and pro-violence and pro-fighting against God and fighting against the Jewish people. And as a result, those children inculcated in those environments, tragically, are this is what their minds fester with. But it doesn't have to be that way. So we have to dispel the idea that there's hundreds of millions of people waiting to kill Jews, and that the only way to accommodate that hatred is to surrender to that, to create, give away land from the land of Israel to non-Jewish people who are saying that their sole goal is to destroy the land of Israel, God forbid. So therefore, once we see the world with the correct lenses, then we can cut through all the falsehood, all the disinformation that's making us think that there's an implacable, impossibly outsized force that wants to come against the Jewish people. That's not true. And once you realize that's not true, then you don't even have to give any calculations to that force. And not only that, but once you realize that the vast majority of the hundreds of millions of people that live under totalitarian rulership in the Middle East, and the millions that live under terrorist regimes, and tens of millions that live under terrorist regimes, they're all yearning to be freed from that. Then you could see that really there's an opportunity to teach these people, and actually teaching these people, the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach is doing a great, great kindness to them, because it's bringing them out from the rulership of a terror regime, and the terror regimes that seek to expand their rule and their influence in the Middle East by toppling more regimes and more governments to bring them under terror rule. That it's very, very important to teach these people the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, which will both be an advantage and a benefit to them and to the Jewish people, because the people that are observing the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach are not going to participate in any sort of negative or violent acts against the Jewish people or against their fellow Arabs. So we must see then that this is the key to unlock the redemption, and the key to unlock peace in Eretz Yisrael, and the key to unlock the redemption of humanity from reigns of terror is the teaching of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And I'd like to start with a story, an incredible story about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that I heard this directly from Rabbi Gerlitsky, who was a Chabad Shliach in Tel Aviv, and he told me that in 1987, Tafshin Mem Zayin, the Rebbe gave a bottle of mashka, was handing out bottles of vodka to different shluchim to use that vodka to celebrate at gatherings and for bring-ins in their different communities. And he gave a bottle to Rabbi Glukowski, who is a Chabad Shliach also in Eretz Yisrael, and he told them that this is for the Arabs. And Rabbi Glukowski looked surprised to receive a bottle of vodka to distribute to Arabs in the land of Israel. And in response to his quizzical look, the Rebbe said that the Arabs are not allowed to drink wine, but they can in fact drink the strong spirits like vodka, and therefore that he should take it to them and he should distribute it among them, and be teaching Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, teaching the 7 laws of Noach to the Arabs in Israel. So when he came back to Israel, Rabbi Glukowski, particularly, and him and Rabbi Gerlitsky, and Rabbi Glukowski worked to prepare a program of teaching Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach to the Arab students in the Arab Kfarim, in the Arab villages throughout the land of Israel. And Rabbi Gerlitsky explained to me that this met with tremendous success, and absolutely they had no opposition. The only person that was opposed and reluctant and dragged his feet and tried to prevent this program of teaching Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach to the Arab children was the head of the Arab school system, who was a Jew. But the Arabs themselves were thrilled and excited to have this program of teaching the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And it was so successful, they came up with written materials and different materials to teach this. And then they were in the different Kfarim, in the different Arab villages. They taught the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. Rabbi Gerlitsky told me that they reached 70,000 Arab children were impacted and influenced directly by the teachings of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach through this program that they initiated. What an incredible opportunity, and what an incredible vision the Rebbe had and is giving to us to have, that we should see that every single human being is fitting and ready and willing to learn the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. So this is exactly what we're meant to be doing. Now, the connection to peace in the land of Israel is by the following continuation of the story that Rabbi Gerlitsky explained to me, that not long thereafter, unfortunately, began an intifada, an uprising that was instigated by terrorist forces in the land of Israel, and that spread and was very violent and spread in different Arab communities against the Jewish neighbors. And the amazing thing was that in those Arab villages where they had taught the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, then there was no rioting, there was no intifada. That those places where they had been successful in reaching the children and the youth with the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, they did not participate in the violence, they did not participate in the rioting. And this should be proof enough of the Rebbe's vision and the Torah's vision and the importance of this concept, that this is the way to bring peace in Eretz Yisrael, is to teach the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, not only among the Arabs in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, but among the Arabs that live outside Israel in the adjoining countries, and of course the whole world. We have 8 billion people to teach. But if you're looking for a way in which to reach the minds and the hearts of the human beings that are suffering in the darkness of a secular education system under the current education system in, unfortunately, the official education system in the land of Israel, and unfortunately facing the terror influences in their education and in their entertainment, and even throughout the land of Israel, then the only way to deal with this, the only way forward, is to teach the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, and to teach these 7 laws of Noach to every single human being, and to inculcate it into them, and to explain to them, and to help them understand the oneness of God, and that there's no force other than God. There's no existence of anything besides God. Ein Oid. And that will give them the inner strength and the spiritual strength to be able to withstand the pressure and the threats of the terrorists that seek to force them into participating in terror activities against other Arabs who are reluctant to participate in the terror activities and in the terror activities against the Jewish people, this is the solution, is teaching Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, and this is really the Rebbe's vision. So I asked Rabbi Gerlitsky, so what happened after that? So unfortunately, he said that because of the start of the Intifada, he and his colleagues became afraid to teach the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach among the Arabs. So we see from this two lessons. Number one is that the effect of teaching the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach is that in those neighborhoods where it was taught, there was no Intifada. So that needs to be taught even more. But also we see a proof of the point made at the beginning when we started earlier in this video, was an explanation that one of the reasons for terrorism and one of the goals of terrorism is to create a separation, create fear and enmity between two different populations, two different groups of people, so that then there will be no effort to try to reach the people in the other population. Because these wonderful shluchim were scared of the violence, then they stopped their activities in teaching the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And that was obviously one of the goals of the terrorism. One of the goals of the terrorism is to divide between the Arabs and Jews in such a way that the Jews feel that they're unable to bring the light of godliness into that part of the population. And that is a falsehood. That is a falsehood. And on the contrary, the more that the terrorists roar and the more that they attack and the more that they attempt to dissuade people from teaching the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, that is a sign that the terrorists are getting nervous. And the activities to teach Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach should increase and increase in a multifold way. And obviously this was the Rebbe's intention, because if there more than the 70,000 kids had been taught and 70,000 youth, but every single Arab had been reached, then there would have been no intifada at all. And we see that this is something the Rebbe himself penned in writing, that if the nations of the world had been observant of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, there would not have been a Holocaust in the natural order of things. So to such an extent is the effect of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach that even those that are anti-Semites and even those that have an inheritance of a Amalek to try to destroy the knowledge of God from the world, and in that process trying to destroy the Jewish people from the world, God forbid, because of their desire to rebel against God, even those people cannot have any effect. They themselves will be powerless and have no choice but to recognize God. So that is the what we can accomplish by teaching Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. We can have a Eretz Yisrael in peace and a complete and whole Eretz Yisrael. That is achievable. Now, in addition to that story about the Lubavitcher Rebbe and encouraging the teaching of Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach in a direct and practical way that it actually affects them, teaching them Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, I want to share with you this beautiful, incredible, moving story about the Lubavitcher Rebbe and the Sadegur Rebbe. So, and this is a Yechidus in 1980, 57-40, and the Rebbe met with the Sadegur Rebbe, and they were discussing the issue of family planning in Eretz Yisrael, and how the government and the doctors as well were putting a lot of pressure and trying to dissuade, working very hard to dissuade young families from having more children, and trying to scare them off and trying to offer all kinds of arguments and persuasive techniques why it was better not to have more children, God forbid. And this is really part of the war, the ongoing war that we're in the midst of right now, the war on Pur Uvu, the war on the commandment that is to be fruitful and multiply, and which we're going to see in a minute how the Rebbe applies this so incredibly in a practical way. So the Rebbe was saying that the most important way to fight this critical battle would be to persuade the government to offer the stipend and actually increase the stipend that's given for having each child. So in Israel, when a person has a child, then they are given a small stipend, and the Rebbe wanted that increased to encourage having more children. So the Sadegur Rebbe said that if that's going to be the case, if there's going to be funds allocated, it should be entrusted only to the religious Jews to make sure that it's going to be used to foster Jewish people having children, and if not, then it would end off going into the stipend would go to the Arabs also, and that was not something that the Saadia Gura Rebbe felt was the appropriate thing to do. So there's a discussion back and forth between the Rebbe and the Saadia Gura Rebbe, and the Rebbe brought up various arguments, and the Saadia Gura Rebbe was protesting that no matter what, the stipend should not be no matter what, the stipend should be controlled, and that this should not go and fund Arabs for having more children. And then the Rebbe flipped the entire discussion on its head. And the Rebbe said that Arabs too should be encouraged to have children. And this is what the Rebbe said. The Rebbe said, people come to me with complaints saying, why don't I differentiate between the Arabs and the Jews? But I told them, this is what the Rebbe said to them, I told them, first of all, according to halacha, according to Jewish law, a ben noach, a non-Jewish person, is obligated, l'sheva tzitzar, he's obligated to inhabit the world and have children. And he's also prohibited to murder. That's one of the Sheva Mitzvos b'nei Noach. And abortion is murder. So therefore, a non-Jewish person is obligated to have children and is forbidden to abort the pregnancy. And furthermore, the Rebbe said, a Jewish person, a Yid, is obligated to ensure that a Ben Noach fulfills his mitzvahs. So if a Yid is able to do so, then a Jew is not allowed to let a Ben Noach to do anything against the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. So when the Yidden are not in power, when they're not running the government, then there's nothing they could do about it. But when they are in power, when the Jewish people are in power like they are in the land of Israel, then a Jew may not allow an Arab child to be aborted. And this is such an incredible moving story that the Rebbe was advocating, that a Jew is not allowed to allow an Arab child to be aborted, and it's the government should be paying stipends to not only to Jewish people to encourage them to have children and to increase the mitzvah of puravu, of being fruitful and multiplying, but in addition, that stipend should be going to the Arabs to making sure that they will bring their pregnancies to term and they will be fruitful and multiply. So we see the incredible vision of the Lubavitcher Rebbe that he saw the value of every single human being, and he saw the value that every single human being is in the eyes of the creator of the world, in the eyes of God. And this, therefore, is really how we're meant to look at the world. This is how we're meant to look at the Arabs. We're meant to look at the Arab peoples and Arab nations as people, as human beings that have been created by God in order that they should civilize the world. And any uncivilizing or decivilizing acts that they take is only a result of the lack of education and the lack of the inculcation of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nei Noach, which is our responsibility to inculcate those into the world and to bring those into the consciousness of mankind and the consciousness of God's oneness into the forefront of mankind's consciousness. So that's really our responsibility. And we can see that it has a tremendous effect. So instead of getting scared of the false disinformation that is presented, where various organizations and agencies present false informations and false polls, citing that very high percentages of the Arab populations are against the Jewish people. There's no independent verification of those, and in fact, those polls are being promoted by people who want to create the impression that there's an intractable enemy that somehow Israel has to surrender in front of that. And then they release false population statistics to try to terrorize the Israeli population into thinking that if they don't surrender the land, they're going to be left with an overwhelming Arab majority in the land of Israel. All of these things are meant to try to cause the Jewish people to cower and be afraid and think that somehow this whole, these nations of people are all against the Jewish people. And it's falsehoods, it's total falsehoods, it's based on disinformation and misinformation. And therefore, it's our job to see the world the way the Torah sees the world. And the example, the two stories I just gave of teaching the Sheva Mitzvos B'nei Noach to the nations, to the Arabs, and particularly the Rebbe's point about making sure that no Arab is having an abortion and that they should also have children and be encouraged to have children is the reality. That is the real reality. And when that being fruitful and multiplying is in conjunction with a proper chinuch, a proper education in Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, then we are really building the world of the Geula, the world that all the prophets prophesied about and recognized that there will be a time when all the nations of the world are going to recognize Hashem. And they're all going to be eager to see the temple rebuilt the Holy Temple rebuilt on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Subsequently to these stories that I've given to you and shared with you, there's a number of other stories that Rabbi David Nachshon was very effective in printing brochures in Arabic to distribute among the Arabs in Israel. And also the late Boaz Kali went and he went to different clan leaders, tribal leaders, and mayors of different Arab communities in Israel and had them sign proclamations promoting the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. So this shows us what's really possible, and not only possible, but is actual. These leaders are looking for the Jewish people to stand up and speak and say what the truth is. And as a matter of fact, when it was the bombing of Gilo and the missile attacks on Gilo in southern Jerusalem, there were 60 imanim, 60 Arab leaders that traveled to Gilo to express their solidarity with the Jewish people and to express their support of the Jewish people against the terrorists. So this is the ripeness in the world that's really ready for the coming of the Mashiach, coming of the redemption. And our job is just to teach the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach and to bring this awareness and this consciousness to all these people and give them the tools to be able to then turn around and teach their own community members to live a righteous life as a Chassidei Umas Ha'ilum. This is what they want. Every human being wants to be one of the Chassidei Umas Ha'ilum. So we need to recognize that and embrace that reality. And that is what the reality is in Eretz Yisrael and all the lands that are surrounding Eretz Yisrael. They're looking, as the Rebbe always said, they're looking for the Jewish people to stand strong and proclaim the truth. When we do that, that is actually helping uplift all the people that are oppressed in all the neighboring countries and all the neighboring areas so that they also can have a hope and can follow the example of standing strong and speaking up for what's right and being able to break out of the bondages of the terrorist and terror regimes that many of them are unfortunately and tragically trapped in on an hour-by-hour basis. Now, I'd like to share a few stories of my own experiences, and just to illustrate the amazing enthusiasm for the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach and for what the Jewish people have to offer, what we've been carrying as our special mission for thousands of years to bring the godly light that was brought down on Mount Sinai and meant to be taught to the nations, that it says that the Rambam writes that it must be taught to the nations of the world as a teaching through Moshe Rabbeinu, through Moses, our teacher. That's the way in which the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach need to be taught and need to be accepted by the nations of the world. So when I was in Eretz Yisrael, after I got married, I learned in a kollel there in Eretz Yisrael, and every Friday afternoon, I and another married student, we would go on what's called Mitzvos, which is going out and reaching out to people and teaching them about Judaism and putting tefillin on the Jewish men and giving Shabbos candles to the Jewish women and encouraging them to do more Torah mitzvahs. And we took along with us brochures in Arabic on the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And as an illustrative example, I recall very distinctly being in the shuk, the marketplace in Ramla. Ramla is a town in the middle of Israel, a city that has a major marketplace. And in that marketplace, there are Jewish stalls and there's Arab stalls in the marketplace. And many of the Jewish stalls have Arab workers. And so I could come up to a stall, and a particular example, came up to a stall, and I started to speak to the Arab workers. They were used to, of course, Chabad students and Chabad Bachram coming through and asking for the Jewish employees and the Jewish store owners. But here I was speaking directly to the Arab workers. And these were teenagers. And they, 18, 19-year-olds, and they literally jumped over their stalls to come and talk to me. They were so enthusiastic to hear about the Sheva Mitzvah Ben Enoch, and I spoke to them at length about the Sheva Mitzvahs. I gave them brochures. Now, this story didn't end there, because in a later week, I was driving with my wife, and I was driving on one of the main roads in that area, and I saw on the side of the road there was a flower stand, and so I selling roses and so forth, and I stopped there to buy flowers for Shabbos and for my wife, and I come out of the car and I walk up. There's a lady, an older lady, that she's selling the flowers, and there is a teenager next to her, and he comes up to me and he says, "Do you remember me? I'm the person that you met in the shuk in Ramla, speaking Hebrew, and that he's been telling his family about the Sheva Mitzvahs, and they're very excited. Do I have more brochures, please? They would like to have more brochures on the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach." And of course, I was happy to give them the brochures, but here was a youth who was so enthusiastic about learning the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and his mother was already familiar. It was actually his mother who was running the stand selling the flowers, that so enthusiastic to learn about the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. And this shows us that this impact that we have from going and teaching somebody and teaching them the Sheva Mitzvah Ben Noach is something that lasts with them. They're eager for more. They're telling their family members about it. He's now coming to me and asking for more brochures. Now, I'll tell you another story before we wrap up, is that my wife and I were traveling to a town in Eretz Yisrael, in the part of called Yehuda and Shomron, and is very deep in that area of the land of Israel. And we crossed what's called this, there's a security line and so forth. We crossed that line in our car, and we were driving to this Jewish town. And we came across, on the side of the road, there was an Arab marketplace that was had actually previously been frequented by Jews, but unfortunately, because of the terrorism, a lot of the Jews were afraid to go there. So I pulled over the car on the side of the road, and I got out of the car, and I walked like into the middle of this market area. And I was totally alone. I was unarmed, and my wife waited in the car, and immediately a crowd of people started to surround me, and the crowd started to increase in size. And I'm talking to them in Hebrew about the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and they're listening very respectfully. And I have these brochures in my hand, these brochures in Arabic explaining the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. And they are very excited about these brochures. And everyone was excited. There was only one person who obviously was I'll tell you by his behavior, he refused to speak in Hebrew. He only wanted to speak in English, and an Arab man, and he was making sure to try to challenge what I'm doing there and so forth, which I basically answered him, but wanted to make sure that I focused on the Arabs who were interested, and recognizing that this highly educated English-speaking person was actually one of the people that's unfortunately there to try to manipulate the other Arabs into the type of activities that are so unfortunately destructive both for the Jews and the Arabs. But the key is not to get distracted by them. The argument is not with them. There's nothing to argue with. The fact is, to teach the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, you just have to get to the people who are the decent people, and then they will have an influence and set straight the people that are trying to rule over them. So what happened was, these young people and the people that were there at this marketplace, they were coming. I had no more brochures. They had taken all the brochures. So they asked me, "Do you have any more brochures?" So I'm thinking to myself, do I have brochures? And I must have sort of subconsciously, as I'm thinking this answer to the question, I'm thinking, do I have more brochures? And I'm thinking that I had in my tefillin bag, I had more brochures in Arabic. And as I'm thinking about that, I look towards the car, which was down there by the road. And that's it. I went back to talk to them. And all of a sudden, I hear honking. Now, the honking was caused because a whole crowd of these Arab youth went and surrounded my car with my wife in it. And they were literally eagerly asking her, do they have more brochures, please, more brochures. They were like basically crowding the car, and they had their heads were like sticking in the window talking to my wife. And the honking was not from my wife. The honking was from the other. It was a one lane road each way. And because the other cars were now being blocked, my car was on the side, kind of on the shoulder. And now there was this crowd of people around the car. And the key point of this story is to recognize the eagerness of these human beings to learn the truth. And there's nothing that's stopping us back from teaching them, holding us back from teaching them, other than ourselves and our own preconceived notions and our own choices, whether or not we want to take the wrong lessons from what we see in front of us. When we hear, God forbid, someone saying something against the Jewish people, we can either take that as an indication of the way everyone else thinks, and that's not the reality. The reality is that people, human beings, want to do the right thing. Human beings God has given them a truth meter. God has given them the ability to return to understanding that there's nothing besides God. And this is what every human being wants. And because a few human beings who happen to be very loud and very manipulative and use terror and fear to cajole everybody and to be able to try to harness everybody and corral everyone into some sort of group think that's going to be against the Jews or against this or against that, or against the Arabs, is all part of the last minutes of exile. Part of the last minute of exiles, that the desperate attempt for those that want to conceal godliness in the world, that they are confused and they think that that's the way they're going to get ahead in life, and they're going to get ahead in life by, they think it's the side that's going to win, God forbid. That's all the confusion of so many people that get swept up into these type of movements. But the reality is they themselves don't want to win. And we learn in Chassidus again and again, the David HaMelech says that my soul was redeemed in peace, because the Rabbim, the many, the multitudes were with me. The multitudes of the people that were in the opposing forces that were fighting against him were on his side. And this is what Torah teaches us and Chassidus teaches us, that even those people that are making the biggest noise against the teaching of Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, even those people are making the biggest noises against God, God forbid, the biggest noises against the Jewish people, and the biggest noises against the keeping the land of Israel intact and expansive. Those people themselves, in their real spiritual essence, they want to see the side of Hashem and the side of what the Torah teaches be successful. That success of Hashem's side and Hashem's reality and Hashem's Torah is going to free them from the terrible, terrible dark place that they live in, where they are living in fear of saying the wrong thing, thinking the wrong thing. And our call is to all those people, even those ones that are watching this video because they've been given an assignment to see what's being said about Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, that they too can be deeply touched, and they are deeply touched by the fact that God loves them and God is creating them at every single moment and is giving them the ability of life and the ability to choose and the ability to want and to see and help bring goodness into the world. And they need to know that the temporary reign of those that want to conceal godliness is only a temporary reign. It's only very, very temporary. And it will surely crumble, and it's going to crumble, and it is crumbling. And the world is waking up to embrace and want to accept the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And the reason I wanted to focus tonight on the discussion of the Jews and the Arabs particularly is because that's an extreme example of where the divisions have been drawn intentionally to try to keep the Jewish people away from teaching the Arabs and the Arabs away from learning from the Jews. and learning from the Jewish people. And that's an extreme example of years and years of propaganda and years of unfortunate terrorism designed to create this inability that's a very, very easy to overcome by recognizing who these human beings really are. And as seeing the examples of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, there's no one more fervent in his desire to see Eretz Yisrael strong and to see his desire that the Jewish people should have the entire land of Israel and should have it completely, that he himself wanted to see that the non-Jews should be learning Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, and that the Arabs should be having more children, and that the Arabs, God forbid, should not be having abortions. So this is our example, this is our message, and we can apply this example to every single population in the world, in any country we're in. And we see this, the same tragedy carrying itself out even in the United States, for example, where you have 60% of black pregnancies in the city of New York end in abortion. This is against the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. It's against the requirement that God implanted in every human being to inherit, to establish themselves into the world and to inhabit the world, and to have children. This is our job as the Jewish people is to reach out to every single one of these human beings. So if you're in Eretz Yisrael and if you're in the land of Israel, then reach out to the Arabs. And if you are in America, there's plenty of Arabs to reach out to also. And there's black people and Native American people and Spanish people and people from European backgrounds and people who are been Americans for generations and generations, and people from all different backgrounds and all walks of life and Asian backgrounds, and every single one of them is waiting for us to teach them the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And so therefore, this is the Rebbe says this is the fulfillment of the promise and the unfolding of the Geula. It's the kiyum of the Iyud, and it's the zeros of the Iyud. It's both the fulfillment and the hastening of the prophecy that all the nations of the world are going to serve Hashem with one in concerted effort to be able to serve the one God of all of creation, and above all creation, and creation of all the spiritual and all the physical. And this is what we say, that the purpose of creating the temple and building the temple in Jerusalem is indicated by Shlomo Melech's prayer, that L'man das kol amei haaretz ki Hashem holakim ein oid, that this is in order that all the peoples of the world should know that there's nothing besides God. And this is the message that we have for all of humanity, and that life, a life of knowing there's nothing besides God, will resolve all our individual exiles, all our individual restraints, all our individual difficulties, and on a person by person basis, and each one that we teach, and including us as the teachers, and also bring about for the entire world a redemption for the entire world, and with the coming of Mashiach now.